Okay, so we've established the effects of Wolff's Law. We've gone over the aspects of bone modeling and bone remodeling and all that jazz and how it works. However, how does Wolff's Law apply to the jawbone specifically? Well, I'm going to explain that in this video. This article is a picture-perfect scientific study that goes over the effects of I can't say that word. The effects of chewing hard foods on the jawbone. For the longest of times... Okay, that's not true. For hundreds of years, the correlation between chewing hard foods and a wider and more robust jawbone has been established. Okay? Right? That can be essentially be seen here. However, the problem is that obviously there was no science actually backing it up. It was only just like speculation. A lot of dentists made a bunch of theories about nutrition and all that jazz, but no one was able to really prove it until this article. Basically, in a nutshell, this study basically conducted rats chewing hard foods when they were still in their developing stage to see what would happen to the jawbone. What was found basically proves the hypothesis that chewing hard foods during the growth stage basically triggers bone remodeling, aka a part of Wolff's Law. This distinction is very clear. Specifically, if you highlight, wait a minute. So basically it says, in this study, we indicated that mechanical loading onto the jawbone in itself can induce bone remodeling using a novel hard diet. Furthermore, we found that loading induces IGF-1 and suppresses sclerostin in osteocytes to enhance bone formation in the enthesis, leading to a more follicle change of the bone. What this means is when the bone, to sum up this fancy science language, what it's saying is that in this study, when a jawbone is in the growing stage, when a jawbone is essentially having stress, mastostory stress, what's going to happen is you're going to have bone remodeling, right? That's going to happen because it doesn't matter what stage of growth you're in, bone remodeling is always going to happen. However, what also happened is bone modeling. This fancy science language that I'm highlighting right now means bone remodeling, okay? Growing of new bone. However, like I discussed in the previous video, when bones respond to stress, what's going to happen is that the ratio of bone modeling to bone remodeling essentially changes over time. Specifically, when you're a child, bone modeling is significantly more present. However, once you sexually mature in age, bone remodeling is significantly more prevalent. This is why when you're an adult chewing hard foods, you're not actually going to grow any new bone, whereas in a child you will. Bone growth is quite messy, and it's extremely difficult to isolate, as seen in this highlighted section. As a result, the researchers essentially made a computer simulation to try and simulate what was happening. Okay? As seen, I think, here. Basically, then what ended up happening was that they compared the computer simulation to an actual animal population, mice specifically, and what ended up happening was that the computer simulation matched the mice, matched the timeline of chewing hard foods on the mice exactly. This is basically just talking about bone modeling in the jaw when chewing hard foods. This paragraph is also just elaborating on bone modeling in the jaw, pretty much. This is basically just the concluding paragraph, pretty much, and why it wasn't actually done. Why this can be a cure for malocclusion hasn't actually been implemented as a type of cure for malocclusion in the modern day. Okay, so this was done on mice, but not humans, which is a very, very good point. However, bone modeling is basically the same. Wolff's Law is fundamentally the same in all mammals. It is expressed differently, and it's expressed vastly different in mammals, but the fundamentals of how it works are the same. This paragraph right here is basically talking about how bone modeling is the same in mice and humans. And as a result, this is why whatever happens to mice basically happens to humans in terms of jaw bone growth when chewing hard foods when you're a kid. Okay, so what does this prove? In a nutshell, this article essentially proves the link of bone modeling to chewing hard foods, okay? So we know the jaw gets bigger. They tested it in rats, and they simulated it. They were able to predict the bone modeling responsive part in a computer, and the thing is that essentially it's the same in all mammals, so therefore it works in humans. Okay? Also, the jawbone gets bigger when chewing hard foods during the bone modeling stage. Alright, it proved that. The article does prove that. It's also important to understand that bone modeling, Wolff's Law, essentially, is prevalent in all animals. It's just expressed differently, but it's there, okay? There's a lot of issues with, like, archaeologists essentially going gong-ho on, like, oh, this type of Wolff's Law was used for this, so therefore this animal's XYZ. You can't really do that. However, it's very obvious that Wolff's Law is present in both bone remodeling and bone modeling. What's also important to note is specifically that the ratio of bone modeling to bone remodeling changes as you age. When you're a kid, a lot more bone modeling happens than bone remodeling, but once you hit puberty and you sexually mature, it flips. Bone remodeling is a primary response to stress, whereas when you're a kid, that's bone modeling. Essentially, this is all just Wolff's Law. Okay? Thank you for listening. The conclusion was kind of choppy, so if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.